Welcome to the Explainer. We're going to use these slides to break down an absolutely incredible true story. We're talking about a 59-story crisis that almost leveled a huge chunk of New York City, and the top-secret mission that saved it.
So let's just think about that for a second. What if one of the most famous skyscrapers in a city like New York was, secretly about to fall down for over a year? Seriously, this isn't some Hollywood blockbuster. This is a real-life thriller that played out almost 60 stories above Manhattan. It's got everything: a fatal design flaw, a hurricane barreling down on the city, and a desperate secret mission to stop a catastrophe.
All right, so let's meet our main character, the Citigroup Center. When this thing was finished back in 1977, it was immediately a standout on the New York skyline. I mean, look at it. But its most famous feature, those giant stilts holding the whole thing up, well, that wasn't just for looks. It was actually a really clever solution to a very tricky problem right there on the ground.
But here's the twist. Buried inside that brilliant design was a hidden and fatal flaw. And the craziest part? It was all because of a seemingly tiny change made during construction, a change that absolutely nobody noticed until it was almost way too late.
So here's the deal. There was this historic church sitting right on the corner of the property, and they couldn't just tear it down. So the lead engineer, a guy named LeMessurier, came up with this wild idea. What if we just lift the building over it? He put the entire 59-story tower on 4 massive stilts, but not at the corners where you'd expect them. Nope, right in the middle of each side. Now, to pull that off and handle all that incredible weight, he had to design this super strong skeleton of V-shaped steel braces to basically funnel all that force down into those columns.
Okay, look at this. This right here is the heart of the problem. It's the one tiny change that almost brought the whole building crashing down. The original blueprints? They called for all the joints in that steel skeleton to be welded. Welded joints are incredibly strong, right? But a contractor came along and said, hey, we could do this faster and cheaper if we just use bolts instead. And guess what? The change got approved. It seemed like a small thing, but trust me, it was a catastrophic mistake.
So for a whole year, the building just stood there, looming over Manhattan, with this terrifying secret hidden inside its steel bones. And honestly, it probably would have stayed a secret too, if it hadn't been for one single engineering student who was just trying to finish a school project.
And this was the question that blew the whole thing wide open. An undergrad student, Diane Hartley, calls up the engineer's office and asks a really simple question. Hey, how did you guys calculate the wind load for winds hitting the building at a 45-degree angle? Quartering winds. It sounds like just a boring technical question, right? But it was the one question nobody had thought to ask, or at least hadn't considered seriously enough. And that question just stuck with LeMessurier. He couldn't shake it. So he went back and double-checked his own math. And what he found was absolutely horrifying. It turns out, for a building propped up on stilts like this one, those diagonal quartering winds put a massive amount of extra stress on the joints. Now, if they had been welded like they were supposed to be, no problem. But the cheaper, bolted joints? Oh man, they would just snap. The bolts would shear right off under that kind of strain.
So all of a sudden, this goes from being a what-if homework problem to a terrifying real-world emergency. This wasn't a theory anymore. The building was a ticking time bomb right in the middle of Manhattan. And to make matters worse, hurricane season had just kicked off.
The numbers LeMessurier ran were just beyond scary. We're not talking about some freak once-in-a-century superstorm to knock this thing over. No, a storm that's statistically likely to hit New York once every 16 years. A totally normal, expected storm had enough power to cause a complete and total collapse. Let that sink in. This wasn't some remote, long-shot possibility. It was practically an inevitability.
And then, as if this wasn't bad enough, the absolute nightmare scenario started to become a reality. A powerful storm, Hurricane Ella, starts forming out in the Atlantic. And where is it headed? You guessed it, straight for New York City. It was the exact kind of storm that this critically weakened building was absolutely not designed to handle.
The stakes here are just hard to even wrap your head around. They secretly brought in the Red Cross to figure out how bad it could be, and their estimate was bone-chilling. If this 59-story tower fell, it could kill up to 200,000 people. I mean, we're talking about one of the most densely packed places on the entire planet. They even drew up a secret evacuation plan for a 10-block radius and put it on standby.
So you've got LeMessurier, right? He's faced with this impossible choice. Admit his mistake and probably ruin his entire career, or stay silent and risk a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. He made the right call. He came clean to Citigroup's top brass, and that confession kicked off one of the most daring and secret repair jobs in the history of construction.
The plan was simple but insane. They had to fix the building without anyone finding out. Can you imagine the citywide panic? So, for 3 straight months, a secret crew of welders worked only at night. They'd go in, rip open office walls to get to the steel skeleton, weld these huge 2-inch thick steel plates over more than 200 of those faulty bolted joints, and then, and this is the part that blows my mind, they would put everything back together, rebuild the walls, clean up the mess every single morning so that when the office workers came in, they had absolutely no idea their building was undergoing emergency surgery overnight.
And the whole time they're doing this, Hurricane Ella is just creeping closer and closer. It really felt like a disaster was about to happen. But then, at the last minute, the storm just turns. It veers sharply out into the Atlantic and misses New York City completely. It was the one stroke of luck they desperately needed. It bought them enough time to finish the repairs, secure the building for good, and nobody was the wiser. The public had no clue.
So, the immediate danger was gone. Crisis averted. But the story doesn't end there. Let's talk about the lessons that were, quite literally, forged in steel after this incredible near miss.
Now this part is just wild to me. This whole insane story, the design flaw, the hurricane, the secret nighttime repairs, it was all kept a complete secret for almost 20 years. It wasn't until a magazine article came out in 1995 that the public finally found out how close New York City came to a disaster of epic proportions. And now, today, this story is a cornerstone of ethics classes for engineering students all over the world.
So, what are the big takeaways here? Well, there are 2 huge ones. First, never underestimate the small stuff. That switch from welds to bolts seemed like a minor cost-saving measure, but it almost doomed the building. It's a massive lesson in why you have to recheck everything when a change is made. And second, psychological safety, or, just being humble. This whole disaster was stopped because one of the top engineers in the world was humble enough to listen to a college student's question. It just goes to show you the most important insights can come from literally anywhere.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In our super complex world, with software, finance, all this crazy engineering, how many other hidden bolted joints are just sitting there, waiting? What modern crisis is just one simple question away from being uncovered? It's a pretty powerful thought that sometimes the most important voice you can hear is the one you'd never, ever expect.